Amira had never worn perfume before her wedding day. Not because she didn't like it, but because life had never offered her the luxury. She was born into nothing, raised in scraps. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was just 6 years old, and the world that followed had been cold and unkind. Her uncle, Sabir, had taken her in, but only out of obligation. To him, she was another mouth to feed, another reminder that kindness cost too much. She cleaned his floors, served his tea, and bowed every time he entered a room. If she cried, he reminded her of the roof above her head. If she laughed, he told her orphans had no reason to be joyful. So when one morning he called her into the drawing room and announced she was to be married, she didn't protest. She just stood quietly, hands behind her back, staring at the rug beneath her feet. "Junaid is a fine man," Sabir said, adjusting his gold ring as though the decision was already made. "His mother, Begum Naz, is strict, but you'll learn. The boy has a business, a home. You'll be provided for. In return, I get the land promised to me by his family." He didn't ask if Amira wanted this. He didn't ask if she knew Junaid. He didn't ask anything, because Amira's life had never been hers to choose. That night, she sat on her small mattress, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above her. It was rusted at the edges, slow and loud, but somehow its tired turning felt like a lullaby. She whispered, to the darkness, "Maybe he'll be kind. Maybe I'll finally matter to someone." But fate had different plans. The wedding was rushed. No music, no joy. Amira wore a rented bridal dress, red with golden embroidery, frayed at the edges. There were no friends to cry with her, no mother to adjust her veil, only silence, and Sabir, busy counting the envelopes of cash on the side table. When Junaid arrived, he didn't even look at her properly. He wore sunglasses during the ceremony, texting someone between rituals. Begum Naz sat like a queen at the front row, fanning herself and nodding in approval every time Junaid rolled his eyes. That night, as they entered the house, her new home, Amira's heart raced. It was a tall duplex in a quiet part of Karachi. She had never been in such a place. White marble floors, wooden stairs, curtains that floated like clouds. But the beauty of a house meant little when it wasn't filled with love. Junaid gave her a cold glance. "Stay out of my room unless I call you," he said. "Don't touch my things. Don't speak too much in front of guests. You represent me now, so don't embarrass me." She nodded, unsure if she should thank him or apologize. "You'll meet my friends tomorrow," he added. "Wear something modern. I don't want people thinking I picked a maid." Amira's heart shrank, but she smiled softly. She had learned long ago that quietness was safer than questions. The first week was manageable. She cooked, cleaned, and tried to be invisible. She waited each day, hoping maybe Junaid would change. Maybe he'd smile. Maybe he'd ask how her day was, but by the second week, the verbal blows began. "Your voice is too loud." "Didn't they teach you hygiene in that orphanage? You walk like a cow. Why is your skin so dull? Buy some cream or something. Can you even read properly?" Every insult was a scratch on her soul. Amira would write in her small diary late at night, hidden under the mattress. It was the only place she was allowed to speak freely. "I'm married, but I'm lonelier than ever," she wrote on one page. "I'm in a home, but I feel homeless," said another. "He looks at me like I'm a mistake." Days turned into weeks. Junaid would return home smelling of cologne and someone else's perfume. He never gave an explanation. Once, when Amira asked him, he slapped her phone out of her hand and shouted, "You're lucky to even be here. Don't act like a wife when you were never chosen." That night, she bled from the inside. Not physically, but emotionally. Like something had torn inside her chest. Begum Naz, who lived in the same house, made things worse. "You're a burden," she said during breakfast. "My son could have married anyone. Instead, he's stuck with an orphan. Don't try to fool us with your innocent face." I want to go home, Amira whispered once. Go where? Begum Naz laughed. You have no one. You are no one. So stay quiet and behave. Junaid didn't want a wife. He wanted a doll, a servant, a prop for family photos and lies told to investors. Amira started eating less. She stayed in the guest room. She slept with the door slightly open so she could run if needed. She stopped calling Sabir. There was no point. He had sold her the moment he accepted land for her name. One day, while cleaning Junaid's closet, a paper slipped out from one of his shirts, a receipt, a pharmacy bill. The medicine listed was for a sexually transmitted infection. Her breath caught. Her hand shook. She fell to the floor and sat there for hours. That night, she did not confront him. She knew the result. But she did. Write in her diary, if he kills me, my body will be found in silence. But God will know. God will see. 3 nights later, the violence began. Junaid came home drunk, his eyes bloodshot, his voice louder than ever. You think you're better than me? He shouted. Because you know how to cook and clean? I never said, Amira began, but that was all she managed to say. The slap came so fast she didn't see it. Her ear rang. Her lips split. She tasted blood and metal and pain. He threw a glass at the wall. Then he dragged her by the hair, calling her worthless, useless, disgusting. She curled in the corner of the room, her arm over her head, waiting for it to stop. When it finally did, she could barely breathe. And then he said, the words that broke her completely. You're lucky I don't dump you where you came from. The garbage. He left her there, sobbing on the floor, as he climbed the stairs to his room and slammed the door. The next morning, Amira stood on the balcony, the wind hitting her face. For the first time in years, she thought about ending it, just stepping over, letting go. But something small held her back. A voice inside, a whisper. Not like this, not today. Live. She made a decision. She would leave. She didn't know how. She had no money, no phone, no friends. But she couldn't stay. Not another day. But before she could even plan, life decided for her. One evening, Junaid came home furious. His father had discovered the bruises on her arms during a family visit. He had warned Junaid. If I hear one more thing, I'll cut you off, he had said. Junaid was livid. How dare she make him look bad? He packed her old clothes in a garbage bag. He didn't let her take anything he had bought, not even a comb. He dragged her outside, past the gate, past the guard who turned his face away, past the neighbors, pretending not to watch. She begged. She cried, please, at least let me take my diary. No, he spat. It belongs to this house, and you don't. He drove her to an empty alley near the outskirts of the city. It smelled of filth and rain and forgotten things. Dogs barked in the distance. Children watched from broken windows. Opened the car door and pushed her out. Her head hit the ground. Her shoulders scraped against the concrete. This is where you belong, he said, throwing the garbage bag beside her, with the rest of the trash. And then he left. Just like that. The silence that followed was deafening. Amira sat there, in the dirt, in her torn clothes, with no one and nothing. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just whispered, Ya Allah, if you are watching, please, don't let this be how my story ends. The cold from the wet ground seeped into Amira's bones as she sat motionless beside the trash pile where her husband had dumped her. It wasn't just the filth or the smell of rot that made her feel inhuman. It was the silence. A silence so sharp it cut through her thoughts. No footsteps came. No voices called out. She had truly been thrown away like garbage, with no one in the world to notice she was gone. The night dragged on in slow motion. She sat under a leaking streetlight that flickered as if mocking her heartbeat, slow, uneven, uncertain. Her arms wrapped around her legs, and the garbage bag Junaid had thrown was now her pillow. Her wedding bangles, once symbols of a sacred bond, lay shattered beside her, broken just like the promises they were meant to represent. When the rain started, it wasn't gentle. It poured. Each drop stabbed her skin like punishment. She didn't move. She didn't cry anymore. There were no more tears to give. Her soul had already cried them all. She just whispered over and over in her head, "Stay alive. Just stay." Alive until morning. But morning didn't bring hope. Morning brought stares. Children walking to school pointed and laughed. A man selling bread passed her with disgust. She pulled the bag closer to her chest and tried to disappear. How strange, she thought, that people could ignore something so broken right in front of them. Not one person asked if she needed help. When the sun rose higher, she stood up slowly, every bone aching, and began walking. She had no destination. Her feet just moved, one after the other. She walked through alleyways, markets, and neighborhoods she had never seen before. People passed by like she was invisible. She looked at their clean clothes, their shopping bags, their laughter, and she felt like a ghost haunting the living. By evening, her legs gave out again near a construction site. She slid down against a brick wall and closed her eyes. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The last thing she remembered putting in her mouth was a spoonful of rice 3 nights ago, before Junaid threw the plate across the room, accusing her of cooking like a beggar. She thought about calling her uncle, Sabir, but even if she had a phone, she knew what he would say. "You've embarrassed the family. You must have done something to deserve this. A woman must endure." That was the word they always used, endure. As if pain was something holy. As if survival meant staying quiet. The next morning, she woke up to the feeling of someone kicking the sole of her foot. "Hey, girl," a young man barked. "You can't sleep here. Move!" She opened her eyes. His face was harsh. Behind him were more workers, laughing. One of them took a photo of her on his phone. "She looks like one of those mad women," someone chuckled. She stood without a word and walked away, ashamed, humiliated, and defeated all over again. That night, as she crouched under a broken bus, stopped near Clifton Bridge, she saw an older woman arranging plastic bottles beside her. The woman glanced at her but didn't speak. Later, the woman tore half of her bun and handed it silently. Amira took it with trembling hands and whispered, "Thank you." It was the first kindness she had received since being abandoned. That small piece of bread gave her the strength to keep going. The following day was the worst. Amira tried to look for shelter. She knocked on the gate of a small mosque and begged for a place to sleep. "Go away," the guard snapped. "We don't want trouble here. You'll bring police." She knocked at another house where a woman was feeding pigeons. "Please, I just want a floor to sleep on tonight. I'll leave before sunrise." The woman frowned and threw the remaining seeds at the birds. "I don't take in girls like you. You people bring shame. You'll attract attention. Go beg somewhere else." By evening, she found herself near the public dump, Olaya Street, where the city's forgotten things went to die. Here, no one stared. No one cared. She sat behind a large bin and laid her head on her knees. The air was filled with the smell of burning plastic and old food, but to her it was oddly safe. It was where her husband had placed her, so maybe this is where she was meant to be. She began writing on the torn cardboard with a broken piece of chalk she found nearby. It wasn't a diary, but it was something. "I survived. No one asked how. No one offered a hand. But I survived." Then she added, "This is not my ending. This is just the part they forgot to write." Her story might have ended there, forgotten, in the shadows. But fate had other plans. That very night, as she sat curled in the corner, a black SUV rolled to a stop nearby. It didn't belong there. It was too clean, too polished. The driver stepped out and said something to a tall man in a white linen shirt and glasses. The man, whose name was Rohan Malik, stood for a moment, scanning the area. Rohan was not an ordinary man. He was a billionaire entrepreneur, known for his chain of clean energy startups and his quiet philanthropy. That night, he had taken a detour. He told his driver to avoid the traffic near the highway. That detour led him straight to where Amira was sitting. He saw her. Not just glanced. He saw her, huddled, dirty, bruised. But what caught his attention wasn't the state she was in. It was the way she was staring into the distance, not with madness, but with deep, unbearable silence. He walked toward her slowly. Amira looked up, frightened. She expected him to shout or wave her off like others did. But he didn't. Instead, he knelt down. "What happened to you?" he asked gently. She didn't reply. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. "Can I help you?" She looked at him, confused. No one had asked her that in months, maybe years. "I have nothing," she whispered. "Not even a name they want to say out loud." Rohan nodded. "Then maybe it's time you had a new beginning." She blinked. "I don't know what brought you here," he continued, "but I know one thing. No human being deserves to be left like this." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said softly, "Because I once lost everything too, and a stranger helped me. Now it's my turn." He offered his hand. She stared at it. Then slowly, she placed her trembling fingers in his palm. He helped her stand. Her legs almost gave way, but he caught her. "Let's go," he said. "Where?" "Somewhere you're not trash. Somewhere you're human again." The ride to Rohan Malik's mansion was silent, but not the heavy kind of silence Amira was used to. It wasn't the silence of fear or threat, like in Junaid's house. It was soft, respectful. Even the driver didn't look at her with judgment. The air conditioning in the car cooled her skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't sweating from fear or exhaustion. She sat there quietly, her hands folded over her knees, her broken fingernails digging gently into the fabric of her old dress. A voice inside her kept whispering, "Don't trust it. This is a dream. Soon someone will wake you up." But no one did. When they arrived at the gates of Rohan's private estate, the guards stepped back respectfully. The gates opened without question. Amira's heart sank even more. She didn't belong here. Not with her tangled hair. Not with her dusty skin. Not with the stench of garbage still clinging to her sleeves. The difference between where she came from and where she had landed was too wide to even understand. And yet, here she was, passing through gates that cost more than her whole past life combined. Rohan turned to her just before she stepped out of the car. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," he said softly. "You're safe here." His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't full of false promises, but it had a kind of weight, like someone who meant what they said. Inside the mansion, Amira was met by an older woman with warm eyes and silver-streaked hair tied neatly in a bun. She wore a cotton sari and had the gentleness of someone who had once been broken, but had survived long enough to heal others. "This is Mrs. Bano," Rohan said. "She's the heart of this house." Mrs. Bano looked at Amira with a mother's eyes, soft but alert, scanning her silently. "Oh, my child," she whispered, then held Amira's arm gently. "Let's get you clean and fed." Amira followed her upstairs. She didn't speak. She was afraid that if she opened her mouth, tears would come out instead of words. The room was bigger than the entire two-room apartment she grew up in with her uncle. A large bed with clean white sheets, a private bathroom with hot water, a soft towel, a mirror that didn't have cracks. Amira stood frozen in the doorway, unsure if she was allowed to step in. Mrs. Bono sensed her hesitation and smiled. "It's yours for now, child. Come, I'll help you wash." Amira flinched at first when the water touched her skin. It had been days since she bathed properly. She wanted to scrub off not just the dirt but the memories. Junaid's angry voice, the bruises, the trash pile, the echo of Begum Nay's saying, "You're nothing." After her bath, Mrs. Bono dressed her in a soft cotton gown and handed her a bowl of warm chicken soup and roti. Amira ate slowly at first, unsure if she was allowed to enjoy it. But the food warmed her from the inside out, and soon her eyes began to water, not from pain, but from kindness. Mrs. Bono sat beside her and said nothing. Just being near was enough. Later that night, Rohan came to check on her. He stood at the door respectfully and asked, "May I come in?" She nodded. He took a seat near the window, careful to keep his distance. "I'm not here to rush you," he said. "But when you're ready, I'd like to understand what happened." Amira looked down at her hands. They were wrapped in gauze. Now, Mrs. Bono had cleaned the small cuts gently, as though every injury told a story. "I was married," Amira whispered. "Not out of love, just for trade. My uncle needed land. They gave me to a man in exchange." Rohan didn't speak. He let her continue. "He was never kind, not once. I thought maybe if I cooked well, or smiled enough, or stayed quiet, maybe he'd change. But he didn't. He got worse. Some nights he didn't come home. Other nights he came drunk. He hit me, called me names, told me I was lucky he even kept me." Her voice shook, but she didn't cry. "He dumped me near the city dump 2 nights ago, said I belonged there." Rohan's hands clenched into fists, but his face remained calm. "You didn't," he said. "You never did. No one belongs there." "I thought I would die," she continued. "That's when you came." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe that place wasn't your ending. Just a doorway." She looked at him then, not at his clothes or his watch or his status. She looked at his eyes. And in that moment, something shifted. For the first time, someone didn't look at her like she was broken. For the first time, someone wasn't trying to own her, control her, or save her because of guilt. Rohan just sat there, present, listening. The days that followed were slow and quiet. Amira rested. She slept long hours, sometimes through the afternoon. She spoke only when she wanted to. Mrs. Bono would check on her regularly, bringing simple food and herbal tea. Rohan didn't push her. He didn't ask her to talk again. But every evening, just before sunset, he would walk in the garden outside, the house, and he made sure to pass near her window. He never looked up unless she did. On the 4th day, she did. She waved. He smiled. The next evening, he left a book on the garden bench, Wings of the Broken Sparrow. Inside it, a note. "We are not what they did to us. We are what we choose to become." Amira hugged the book to her chest. One morning, Amira asked Mrs. Bono if she could help in the kitchen. "You don't have to," the older woman said gently. "I know," Amira replied. "But I want to. I want to do something that doesn't. Remind me of him." From then on, she peeled vegetables, washed dishes, and even baked simple flatbread. Every task made her feel a little more human. Her hands were still shaky, her voice still soft, but her spirit was no longer silent. One afternoon, she saw her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her face had color again. Her eyes weren't swollen. Her lips had healed. She touched her cheek and whispered, "You're still here." That night, Rohan invited her for dinner. They sat in the balcony under yellow fairy lights. The city glowed in the distance, but the space between them was still. "I want to ask something," he said. "But only if you're ready." She nodded. "Why didn't you run earlier?" She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "Because I believed what they told me. that I was lucky to be chosen, that I should stay quiet, that no one else would ever want me. Rohan exhaled. They lied. I know now, she said. But back then I didn't. He looked at her with quiet admiration. You're braver than most people I know. You didn't just escape a place. You escaped a prison of belief. Amira smiled faintly. I want to help others, she said suddenly. Women like me. Girls who are told they're trash. I want to do something. Anything. You will, Rohan said. I'll help you build it. Whatever it is. She looked at him, startled. Why? He shrugged gently. Because you've already helped me. You reminded me that being powerful means nothing unless we use it to lift others. They sat there for a long time, saying nothing, and for the first time since the dump, Amira didn't feel like a forgotten thing. She felt like a seed, planted in dirt, but destined to bloom. And somewhere far away, in a corner of the city, Junaid sat at a cafe laughing with friends, completely, unaware that the woman he threw away like garbage had been found by fate, and that her story was just beginning. Amira stood barefoot on the marble balcony, her fingers wrapped around a warm cup of chai as the first rays of morning sun spilled across the courtyard below. The world here was so different, too clean, too quiet, too kind. The pain that once screamed in her bones had now settled into something softer, a bruise that no longer throbbed, but still pulsed quietly beneath the surface. Behind her, soft footsteps echoed. She didn't need to turn. She already knew who it was. Good morning, Rohan's voice came, calm and respectful as always. She turned slightly and smiled. Morning. You slept well? Better than I deserve, she said softly. He tilted his head. Amira, you don't owe anyone guilt for resting. Rest is not a reward for perfection. It's a right. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the garden below. A small blue bird hopped across the grass, pecking gently at a petal. It reminded her of something she had long forgotten. Joy in small things. After a moment, Rohan said, I have to leave for the city this afternoon. There's a board meeting, but I'll be back tomorrow. Amira nodded again. It had become a rhythm between them, his leaving and her waiting. But unlike before, she wasn't afraid anymore. His absences weren't threats. His return didn't feel like danger. I've asked Mrs. Bano to bring you a few books from the library, he added. She said you read quickly. I used to, Amira said. Before I stopped believing I had a future. Rohan didn't speak. He simply looked at her for a moment, then nodded. You do. You have one now. When he left that afternoon, Amira spent most of her time in the sunroom, curled up with a worn copy of A Room of One's Own. The irony wasn't lost on her. For years, she had begged silently for just that, a room of her own, a space where no one shouted, judged, or broke her spirit. And now she had it. But even paradise has shadows. That evening, Mrs. Bano came into her room looking tense. She held her phone in her hand and her lips were pressed tightly together. What is it? Amira asked, sitting up straight. Mrs. Bano hesitated, then handed her the phone. Don't panic, child. Just look. On the screen was a social media post. Nothing viral, nothing grand. Just a picture. Grainy. Zoomed in, but unmistakably her. Sitting in the back seat of Rohan Malik's car. A caption read, Is this the mystery woman spotted with billionaire Rohan Malik near Clifton? Sources say she was picked up from a garbage site. Amira's heart sank. Her hands began to shake. No one knows your name, Mrs. Bano said quickly, and Rohan's team has already begun handling it. They're contacting the platform. But someone saw you? Someone took this? Do you think it was Junaid? I don't know, the older woman replied honestly. But I wouldn't be surprised. The world loves to shame women, especially when they start standing again. That night, Amira couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. What if he found her? What if people started talking? What if Rohan's reputation was ruined because of her? She got up and walked barefoot to the kitchen. She didn't realize Rohan had returned early until she found him standing there, holding a glass of water. He looked at her, concerned. You saw it? She nodded. I'm sorry. I didn't want to bring trouble into your life. You didn't, he said firmly. They did. People who can't mind their own shadows. People who fear seeing a woman rise after being broken. Amira looked down. I feel like I'm causing chaos just by existing. Rohan set the glass on the counter. Amira, let me tell you something I've never told anyone. She looked up, surprised. I used to stutter as a child, badly. So badly that I couldn't even say my name sometimes. I was bullied, mocked. My own teachers told me I'd never amount to anything. And one day I stopped speaking altogether. For a year, a full year of silence. Amira's eyes widened. My father, may he rest in peace, came into my room one night. He knelt beside me and whispered one word in my ear. What was it? Rohan looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. Enough, he continued. He said, enough. You have suffered enough. You've listened to them enough. You've hidden long enough. Speak again. If you stutter, stutter proudly, but do not disappear. Amira swallowed hard. Her eyes burned. That word changed me, he said, and now I'm giving it to you. Enough. You've cried enough. You've been hurt enough. You've lived in fear long enough. She looked at him, trembling. You don't have to run anymore, he said. You don't have to apologize for breathing. You don't have to hide. A sob escaped her throat, and then another. He stepped closer, but didn't touch her. He simply stood there, a pillar of quiet strength. That night, Amira slept better than she had in years. Not because the fear disappeared, but because she finally had a shield to stand behind. A voice that didn't demand silence, but offered protection. The next morning, Amira stood before the mirror and brushed her hair properly for the first time in weeks. She looked at her reflection and whispered the same word Rohan had. Shared. Enough. And with that, she decided she would no longer live like a ghost. She began taking small steps toward healing. She joined Mrs. Bono in preparing meals for the staff. She helped organize the books in the library, and then one day she surprised even herself by asking Rohan, Do you think I could learn how to work in your foundation? He smiled, his eyes full of light. I was waiting for you to ask. The following week, she started attending planning meetings for the Malik Women's Initiative, an NGO focused on providing vocational skills to abandoned and abused women. She mostly listened at first, but slowly her voice returned. She's very observant, said one board member. Smart, too. Where did you find her? Rohan simply replied, She wasn't lost, just buried. Now she's rising. Meanwhile, across the city, Junaid was sitting in a bar laughing with two men he barely liked. His phone buzzed. Another gossip post. Another rumor about the billionaire and the garbage girl. He smirked, showing his friends. Imagine someone actually thinking she belongs with him. But in the deep corners of his heart, something was shifting. A sour taste. A whisper of regret he didn't want to name. 2 days later, he received a letter. It came on embossed paper with a gold seal. The words were cold and clear. Notice of divorce and legal proceedings, filed under Protection of Women's Safety Act. You are hereby notified. He tore the letter in half. But the rage didn't leave him. That night, for the first time, he went home to an empty house. No servants, no dinner, no one to bully. Only silence, and his own echo. The world had moved on without him, but Amira, she was just getting started. Amira walked slowly through the halls of Rohan Malik's mansion, sunlight spilling in through the long glass windows like golden silk. It had been weeks since she had first stepped into this home as a bruised stranger. Now her shoulders didn't hunch anymore. Her footsteps had weight. Her voice no longer cracked with fear. There was still pain in her past, but she was no longer defined by it. That morning, she carried a small clay pot filled with tulsi leaves. Mrs. Bono had told her, planting tulsi near a window brought peace. Amira believed it. She didn't know much about peace before, but she was learning. Every day was a lesson. "Good morning, sunshine," came a familiar voice from the top of the stairs. Rohan stood in a casual white kurta, holding a rolled newspaper in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. He looked tired, but his smile was warm. The kind that made you feel like home wasn't a place. It was a person. Amira smiled back. "You're early today." "I canceled a meeting," he replied. "The board will live without me for a day." "You canceled a meeting?" "For Tulsi?" she asked, her tone teasing. "No," he said, walking down slowly. "I canceled it because someone once told me that sitting beside a window with tea and silence can heal more than therapy." She laughed softly. It wasn't forced. It wasn't hidden. It was real. They sat together on the veranda, looking out over the green garden Rohan had built for his late mother. She had passed away before his company ever became successful. He had always said that everything he created was in her name. "I think she would have liked you," he said quietly. Amira turned to him. "Your mother?" He nodded. "She was gentle like you, but fierce when it mattered. She believed every woman carried fire in her bones. Some just needed the right wind to let it burn." Amira looked down at her hands. They were no longer bandaged, no longer shaking. Her nails had grown back. Her skin, once scratched and bruised, was now smooth and brown and alive. "I never believed I'd be anything more than what they told." "Me," she whispered. "Junaid. He made me believe I was lucky to even be spoken to. That being beaten was better than being alone. That suffering meant I was loyal." Rohan looked at her gently. "They taught you wrong. Love is not pain. Loyalty is not silence, and no woman deserves to beg for dignity." Amira nodded, blinking back tears. "I'm starting to understand that now." For the first time in her life, she felt safe enough to feel anger, and then release it. She didn't want revenge. She wanted freedom, and she was finally tasting it. Later that day, she walked into the Malik Foundation building for the first time as a team member, not as a survivor, not as a guest, but as someone with purpose. The staff welcomed her warmly. She had her own desk, a small one, but it had her name on it. She was tasked with coordinating the new vocational training center for women who had fled domestic violence, sewing machines, bookkeeping classes, cooking lessons. Everything she wished had existed when she was thrown out. She sat through the orientation, taking notes. Her handwriting was still shaky, but her eyes were sharp. And when the trainer asked her to speak about why she was there, she stood up slowly, held the mic tightly, and said only one sentence. "I know what it feels like to be thrown away, but I also know what it feels like to be found." Everyone clapped. Some cried. One woman in the back stood up and whispered, "Thank you." That night, Amira found Rohan waiting for her on the garden bench. He looked at her with pride, not the pride of a man who had rescued a woman, but of someone who had witnessed her rescue herself. "I heard you gave your first talk," he said. "I didn't plan to," she replied, sitting beside him. "But the words just came." "Maybe you've had them inside you all along." Amira looked at the stars. "Do you think people can really start over?" "I don't think," Rohan said. I know, and you're the proof. They sat in silence, for a long time, until she spoke again. I want to visit that place. He turned to her. Which place? The dump, where he left me. I want to go back, not to relive it, just to see it as someone new. He hesitated. Are you sure? She nodded. Yes, I want to see it through healed eyes. So the next morning they drove back. To the alley near the Clifton waste site, the smell was still there, the flies, the distant barking of stray dogs. But this time, Amira wasn't barefoot. She wasn't bleeding. She wasn't begging. She wore a light blue kurti, tied her hair back neatly, and stepped out of the car with quiet confidence. She walked to the very spot where she had once collapsed in tears, her forehead pressed to mud and old bread wrappers. She stood there now, taller, calmer. She bent down and picked up a small stone. This is for me, she said. Not to remember the pain, but to never forget how far I've come. Rohan stood beside her. You're incredible, you know that? She smiled without pride. I'm just alive. As they returned to the car, a little girl passed them, barefoot, carrying a plastic sack over her shoulder. She looked about 8. Her dress was torn, but her eyes were curious. Amira bent down and smiled at her. Are you hungry? She asked. The girl nodded. Rohan opened the trunk and handed Amira a small tiffin of rice and lentils. Amira gave it to the girl and gently touched her cheek. There's a place near here called Amara Haven. Go there. Tell them Amira sent you. The girl smiled shyly, then ran off. Amira turned to Rohan. We need more shelters, he nodded. Then we'll build them. Weeks passed. Amira grew in confidence. She began managing outreach teams, training programs, even mentoring other women. Her story spread, but not as gossip, as inspiration. She was discarded, one newspaper wrote. And now she's a lifeline. People began donating. Volunteers showed up. Survivors found strength in her voice, and through it all, Rohan remained by her side. Never demanding, never rushing, just present. Then one evening, as they stood near the koi pond outside the mansion, Amira said softly, You gave me peace. Rohan looked at her. No, you earned it. She shook her head. You don't understand. I've known roofs before, but never a home. I've known silence, but never safety. I've known wealth, but never worth. And now? He asked. She looked at him, her eyes gentle. Now I know love, the kind that doesn't hurt, the kind that builds. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Then let me build the rest of it with you. She blinked. Are you? He reached into his pocket, pulled out a simple gold ring. No diamonds, no flash. This isn't for charity. This isn't because I feel sorry. This is because I love who you are, and I want to give you a life where you never have to ask permission to feel joy again. Tears filled her eyes. Her hand flew to her mouth. Yes, she whispered. Yes. They embraced quietly. No music, no camera flashes. Just two people, once broken, now whole. And somewhere, deep in the city, Junaid sat in a small room filled with unpaid bills and fading pride. He scrolled through a photo online, Amira standing beside Rohan, cutting a ribbon to a new shelter named after her. He threw the phone down. He had once called her garbage. Now she was building palaces of peace. The day after Rohan proposed, the air felt different, not heavy, not rushed, but full of something both new and deeply familiar, hope. It was the first time Amira woke up with the understanding that she had a choice, not just to say yes or no, but to decide her life, completely, freely. She sat on the edge of her bed, the same bed that had once felt like a stranger's gift. Now it was her space, her sanctuary. Sunlight crept across the floor tiles, warming her bare feet. She closed her eyes and whispered a single prayer, not for escape, but for clarity. Downstairs, Rohan was already awake. He sat in the study, flipping through a file with one hand while sipping tea with the other. He wasn't thinking about business that morning. His thoughts were far away, on her. On the way, she had looked at him last night, eyes full of surprise, not just at his proposal, but at the possibility that someone could love her without chains or conditions. He had been patient, always. He never pushed, never demanded. He knew Amira was still stitching herself back together, thread by thread, and he was willing to wait, even if it meant never being anything more than the man who helped her find her wings. When Amira entered the room, he stood instinctively, not from formality, but respect. She wore a pale green kurta and no makeup, yet her presence was regal, soft but strong. "Rohan," she began, voice calm but honest. "About yesterday." He waited. He didn't interrupt. She looked at him, her hands folded gently in front of her. "You offered me something beautiful, something kind. And I never imagined a day would come where a man like you would ask someone like me to stand beside him in life." He shook his head softly. "Amira, you're not someone like—" "Let me finish," she said with a gentle smile. "Please." He nodded. "I want to say yes. Every part of me wants to say yes. But I also know I'm still healing. And love, real love, deserves the best version of both people. Not broken halves leaning on each other to survive, but whole hearts that can lift each other." Rohan stepped forward slowly. "And you think you're not whole yet?" She looked away. "There are still nights I wake up gasping. There are still sounds that take me back to that dump. There are still days I look in the mirror and see a girl who was thrown away." His heart ached, not out of rejection, but admiration. "But," she continued, her voice steady, "I am not saying no. I'm saying wait for me. Just a little longer. Let me come to you not as a rescued girl, but as a woman who chose her future." Rohan's eyes softened. He reached out and gently took her hand. "I've waited this long, Amira. I'll wait longer, and not because I need to save you, but because I want to walk beside you, at your pace, always." Her eyes welled with tears, not from sorrow, but from relief. This was what she had dreamed of, but never dared to believe was real. A love that allowed space, a love that understood timing, a love that honored healing. Over the next few weeks, Amira poured her energy into her work. The second Amara Haven shelter had just opened in Rawalpindi, and she was at the center of it, designing programs, meeting with sponsors, and counseling new survivors. Each woman she spoke to reminded her of herself in some way. One had scars across her back. Another had arrived barefoot with a baby in her arms. All of them shared a look, the look of someone who had tasted pain too deep for words. And in every case, Amira didn't offer pity. She offered power. "You are not the worst thing that's ever happened to you," she told them. "You are the thing that came after." Meanwhile, Rohan continued supporting her from the sidelines. He never missed a launch, never dismissed a late-night idea. He even gave up his corporate office, turning it into a resource library for women in the foundation. "I can build companies anywhere," he told her. "But what you're building, this matters more." One evening, Amira stood alone at the balcony of the new shelter. A cool breeze brushed past her cheeks, and the city lights shimmered below, like stars. She remembered her first night at the dump, the smell, the fear, the feeling of being invisible. And then she remembered the night Rohan knelt beside her, not with pity, but with purpose. She took out her phone and typed a message. "Come, See me. I'm ready to talk. Rohan was there within the hour. They met at the garden where the first Amara Haven had begun. The tulsi plant Amira had once brought from Rohan's home had grown taller, stronger, just like her. I wasn't sure if I should message you, she admitted. But I couldn't go another day without saying this. Rohan waited, quiet and open. I'm still healing, she said. But I'm also growing. I may not be perfect, I may still have fears, but I want to face them with you. He took a step closer. I want to build a life with you, not because you rescued me, but because you see me, and you never looked away. Rohan reached into his jacket and pulled out the same ring he had shown her weeks ago. I kept it with me, he said softly, every day, not as pressure but as hope. She smiled through tears and held out her hand. Now, she said, I'm ready. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Simple, elegant, perfect. There was no crowd, no applause, just the quiet, approval of the wind and the stars above. Later they sat together, her head on his shoulder, his hand over hers. Do you know what the most beautiful thing is? Amira asked. What? That I'm not afraid anymore. He looked at her, eyes glowing. I used to think healing meant forgetting the past, she whispered. But now I know. It means building something so strong the past can't break it anymore. They stayed like that until the sky turned deep blue and the shelter lights glowed like lanterns of hope in the distance. Far across the city, Junaid received the court notification. His marriage had been officially dissolved. He crumpled the paper in his hand, surrounded by unpaid bills and silence. No one came to visit. No one stayed. Even his mother, Begum Naz, had returned to her hometown, her pride shattered, her power gone. The same man who once controlled everything now had nothing. And Amira? She had everything he never understood. Peace, purpose, and a love built not on fear, but on freedom. It was a bright Thursday morning in Islamabad when the storm Amira had long feared finally returned, not as a whisper, but as a knock on the polished glass doors of the Amara Haven headquarters. She had just finished a training session with 5 new women who had joined the shelter that week. Their eyes were tired, their bodies tense. But by the end of the session, they had laughed. Just once. But it was real. Amira stepped out of the conference room with her notepad in hand, her scarf loosely tied around her shoulders. She was wearing her favorite mustard-colored kurta, the one Mrs. Bono had helped her tailor. It was simple but elegant, just like her life had become. Then the receptionist rushed toward her, eyes wide. Madam Amira, there's someone outside asking to speak to you. Amira raised an eyebrow. A reporter? No, it's a man. He says his name is Junaid. Time slowed. The hallway, once full of calm, suddenly buzzed like a wasp's nest in her ears. The name wasn't just a word. It was a trigger, a wound, a flash of fists, a flash of trash piles and bruises and silence. But she didn't flinch. Where is he? She asked. The receptionist hesitated. Outside, by the front gate. Security hasn't let him in. Amira exhaled and handed over her notepad. Hold my calls. I'll speak to him. She walked through. The corridor, past rooms filled with safety and healing, past the garden she had planted, past the framed photo of her and Rohan at the second shelter's ribbon cutting. Each step she took felt like a closing chapter. The moment she stepped outside, the sunlight hit her face, and so did the past. Junaid stood there, hands in his pockets, dressed in a wrinkled shirt and dusty shoes. He looked older, thinner. His face had lost its sharp arrogance. His eyes were sunken. Even his posture was unsure. When he saw her, he blinked hard. She didn't look like the woman he had dragged to the garbage pile. She didn't look like his victim. She looked like someone untouchable. He took a cautious step forward. Amira, Her voice was calm, firm. "Stop right there. Speak from where you stand." He stopped. I wanted to see you." She folded her arms. "You've seen me. What do you want?" He looked down, then back up. "I've lost everything," he muttered. "The company kicked me out. My mother left, my friends. They disappeared. I don't even have a proper place to sleep. I just wanted to talk." Amira tilted her head slightly. "When I begged you to talk, when I asked for just one moment of your mercy, where were you?" "I was wrong," he said quickly. "I didn't know what I was doing." "No," she said, her voice like sharpened. Silk. "You knew. You just didn't care." Junaid's eyes darted. "I've changed. Please. I have nothing. Not even respect left. I want peace." Amira looked at him for a long moment. "Peace," she repeated slowly. "You want peace now?" He nodded. "Yes." "Please!" "You kicked me out with nothing but a garbage bag," she said, her voice steady. "You told me I belonged to the trash. You left me to die. And now, you want me to be your bridge back to peace?" Junaid's lips trembled. "I was sick. My head wasn't right. I thought you would ruin me." She stepped forward, closing the gap between them, but staying just beyond arm's reach. "You ruined yourself. And you know what's worse? You didn't just try to destroy me. You believed you were allowed to." He lowered his head. "You're right. I'm sorry." Amira breathed deeply, and for a moment, the silence between them wasn't tension. It was clarity. The kind of silence that speaks louder than shouting. "I don't hate you," she said at last, "but I won't carry you anymore." Junaid looked up, confused. "I won't be your guilt dump. I won't be your redemption project. If you're truly sorry, go help yourself, change your path, but don't stand here hoping that I'll erase what you did to me." He swallowed hard. "So this is it?" She nodded. "This is it." Then she added, "But I forgive you." The words hit him like a wave. "I forgive you," she said again. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace more than I deserve revenge." He blinked, eyes glossy. "Amira, I am not yours to pity," she said, turning to go. "And you're not mine to fix." Then she paused and turned her head slightly over her shoulder. "And one more thing, you were wrong that day." "About what?" he asked weakly. She looked him dead in the eye. "I never belonged in the trash. You just couldn't see value in anything you didn't own." With that, she walked back inside. The automatic doors closed behind her with a soft hiss that felt like a final full stop. She didn't look back. Inside, staff members stood silently, having watched everything unfold through the glass. They looked at her with awe, but Amira just walked past them and whispered, "Please get him a bottle of water and ask him to leave peacefully." Then she returned to her office and sat at her desk. Across the table lay the final draft for the next shelter, this one in Faisalabad. She picked up her pen and signed it. Approved. An hour later, Rohan entered her office. He had heard what happened. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I'm better than okay," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I faced him. I faced everything, and I didn't break." He smiled with pride. "You didn't just survive him. You outgrew him." That evening, they walked through the garden behind the foundation. The tulsi plant she had planted months ago had now split into two. Mrs. Bono said it was a sign of rebirth. "Do you still want to marry me?" Amira asked suddenly. Rohan looked at her. "Always." She smiled, eyes soft. "Then I think I'm ready now." He took her hand in his, warm and steady. They said nothing more. The world had already spoken too much. They had both learned that love isn't loud. It's consistent, and justice isn't always revenge. Sometimes justice is simply the act of standing tall when someone expected you to stay on your knees. Amira stood tall now. She had once been thrown out like trash. Now she was building an empire of healing, one woman at a time. Amira's wedding day didn't have the glitter of a grand affair or the roar of celebrity cameras. It didn't need it. The garden behind the third Amara Haven shelter in Faisalabad was decorated with soft lights, hand-stitched banners, and rows of marigolds picked by the very women the shelter had rescued. The scent of fresh jasmine hung in the evening air. There was no orchestra, just a young girl playing the flute, her melody delicate and full of grace. As Amira stood under a simple arch woven from cane and flowers, she looked out at the women seated before her. Survivors, sisters, some had come barefoot, others wore borrowed shawls, but all of them carried the same story in their eyes, the pain of betrayal, the courage to leave, and now, the joy of being seen. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a statement. When Rohan entered, dressed in a plain off-white kurta and smiling like the sun had risen just for her, the entire courtyard paused. He walked toward Amira slowly, as if savoring every second. Mrs. Bano stood between them as the officiant, her hands holding a small Quran, her voice steady with pride. "Do you take her not just as wife, but as partner in soul and service?" "I do," Rohan said without hesitation. "Do you take him not just as husband, but as friend, protector, and equal?" Amira's voice didn't shake. "I do." When the final prayer was read, and the applause burst gently into the night, Amira didn't feel like she had entered a new life. She felt like she had finally returned to the one she was always meant to live. But the story didn't end with a wedding. It started there. 2 weeks after the ceremony, Amira and Rohan stood on the second floor of a new building in Hyderabad. Below them, construction workers carried bricks, and inside, young women painted walls with bright, hopeful colors. This was to be the fourth Amara Haven shelter, funded by donations, managed by survivors, and inspired by the girl who once had no roof of her own. Amira walked through the unfinished halls barefoot. She liked feeling the ground beneath her toes. It reminded her that everything she now stood on was real. Not a dream, not a borrowed life. Volunteers from all over the country had joined the movement. Women came from Multan, Quetta, Gilgit. Some were teachers. Others were doctors. One had been a domestic worker for 20 years until she finally found the courage to walk away from the man who treated her like furniture. Amira met each one personally. She listened. She cried with them. And more often than not, she shared her own story, not the polished version, but the raw one. About the night she slept next to a trash pile, whispering to the stars. About the moment a man she didn't know knelt beside her and simply said, "You don't belong here." That line became the motto of Amara Haven. You don't belong here. You belong to yourself. Rohan helped scale the initiative into a national mission, but he always made it clear. Amira was the heartbeat. He was just the hands. One day, a journalist from an international news agency came to interview her. He was British-Pakistani, curious and kind, and had heard whispers about a modern-day Noor Jahan of justice. Amira sat on a rooftop garden with him, sipping chai. "What do you want the world to remember about you?" he asked. She thought for a moment, then replied, "That I wasn't brave every day, that I didn't fight with a sword. But I kept standing, even when I was shaking." He looked at her, moved. "You've built 6 shelters in a year. You've helped over 2,000 women. You've spoken at the UN Women's Conference. And yet, you speak so simply." She smiled. Because pain was never fancy, and healing shouldn't be either. When the article was published, its headline went viral, "Thrown in the trash, now building thrones of hope. Amira's mission to shelter the broken." Donations poured in. A famous singer offered to do a benefit concert. A furniture company volunteered to outfit all new shelters for free. A group of retired teachers created weekend literacy classes at Amara Haven, Lahore. But even with all the attention, Amira kept her rhythm the same. Each morning she prayed. Each evening she wrote in her diary. Sometimes she wrote to the old version of herself. The girl with the bruises. The girl with the broken slippers. The girl who once wondered if she mattered. "You mattered," she wrote. "You always did. They just couldn't see it." On the anniversary of her being left at the garbage heap, she returned to that same place with Rohan. The dump had since been cleaned and developed into a small park thanks to a city beautification project Amira had supported. She stood at the exact spot, now a paved walkway with a bench, and beside it, a bronze plaque had been installed. It read, "To every woman told she was worthless, you are the beginning, not the end." That day, she planted a tulsi seedling beside it, and just as she was about to leave, a little girl passed by, dragging a broken school bag behind her. Amira bent down. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Faiza," the girl replied shyly. "Are you going to school?" Amira asked. The girl nodded hesitantly. "Sometimes, when my uncle lets me." Amira looked at Rohan. "Get her enrolled, full-time," she said, "and give her whatever she needs." He nodded without asking why. Because he already knew. Later that night, Rohan and Amira sat on their porch at home. The air smelled of mango blossoms. Their hands were intertwined. The silence between them was full, not empty. "You've changed the world," Rohan said. "No," Amira replied. "I've just reminded it to listen." He kissed her forehead. They didn't need more words. Across the country, a quiet revolution was rising. And it all began with a girl who was once thrown away, who stood back up and built a shelter strong enough to hold thousands of others who thought they couldn't.